This week, the Shabbat, we've reached the fourth book of the Torah, Bamidbar, in which God tells Moses, take a census of every male from each tribe, from 20 years old and up, who are able to bear arms. God will begin to lead his newly formed nation on its journey through the desert toward the promised land, and he starts with the formation of an army. We'd been given the tools to fight the battles ahead, but we would have to learn to use them. And this is a picture of our lives. It's like after a baby boy is born, he goes through a period of weaning, of learning to walk, falling, climbing, getting into trouble, crying for help, getting soothed by mother or father, who hopefully are close by, and starting all over again. But there's a difference between a human parents and our Heavenly Father. He is always close by. God would be showing his people that he would go before them every step of the way. Our part would be to do and obey. And in this process, we would learn to trust him. Trust is the key to living a life of shalom, of having inner peace. That's the secret weapon of the Torah. Now, the first chapter lists the names of the elected leaders, beginning with the tribe of Reuben, the firstborn son of Jacob. Now, it says in verse 20, the descendants of Reuben, Bechor Israel, Israel's firstborn. This simple phrase, Bechor Israel, is so easily passed over, but it gave me hope when I read it. You know, Reuben had lost the right of inheritance when he had transgressed with Bilhah, his father's wife, even if he had a good reason. But here, he's still recognized as Israel's firstborn son. Now, this shows us God's compassion and forgiveness. Even when we know that we have failed, we have fallen out of favor with God, and like Reuben, we will suffer the consequences, but he will never forget about us. He will never abandon us. This is also demonstrated in the names of every leader mentioned. Each name is connected in some way with the God of Israel. For instance, Elitzur ben Shedior, who was elected to lead the troops of Reuben's clan, the first one. His name, it means Eli, my God. Tzur is a rock. And the next one is Shalumiel ben Tzuri Shaddai. Shalom comes from shalom, peace. El is God, so God is my peace, or at peace with God. Look at these beautiful pictures. Even his father, Tzuri Shaddai, God is my rock. Every man from the 12 tribes was counted, and their duties are repeated. Duties of bringing offerings to the dedication of the Mishkan and the leading of their troops. Every single one repeats those two things, bringing offerings and leading their troops. He doesn't say that all the tribes are going to do that. He names each one, showing us that every person is significant to God. We need to know that. We need to remember that. The total number of men enrolled in the army was 603,550, close to the number of men who had left Egypt fully armed. But at that time, their hearts were not yet ready to fight. They still had a slave mentality. Just because we can hold a gun doesn't mean we can fire it. Now, at the beginning of the second year of freedom, they were a little more prepared. God knows our hearts, and he slowly trains us for the battles ahead. He's not like us. He never pushes. He guides gently, slowly. Next, the tribe of Levi would be counted separately. Although everyone speaks of only 12 tribes, Joseph having been divided into Manasseh and Ephraim, the Levites make up the 13th tribe. You know, we tend to believe what others tell us. But we always have to check the truth with the Torah. Perhaps it's because there's such a stigma around the number 13. But for Israel, 13 is a good number. In fact, in Gematria, it represents the number of God. The Levites alone would be in charge of the Mishkan and were appointed to serve Aaron and his sons in all the duties pertaining to the tent of meeting. Anyone on the outside who drew near their duties would die. What's the reason for this harsh ruling? God knows our hearts. He knows how we long for something that doesn't belong to us, or to do something that's been given to someone else to do. He wrote that in the 10th commandment about not coveting. God was showing this new nation that when they disobeyed his rules, there would be consequences, even if they happened hundreds of years later. For example, in 2 Samuel 6, we are shocked to read about Uzzah's sudden death after he reached out to save the Ark of the Covenant from falling off the cart. His quick action seemed like the logical thing to do. But Uzzah was from the tribe of Judah, and the responsibility for carrying the ark belonged to the family of Kahat. Uzzah wasn't coveting any position from what we see, but the fear and reverence of God had to be put into the heart of this fledgling nation so that it would become second nature, not to desire to step into anyone else's role. This can make us sick. Children don't always understand why they have to abide by the rules, but the Torah is clear. There are consequences for disobeying his principles, and it is always for our good. All the men of Israel were originally called to be kingdom of priests, Kohanim. Their role would have been to make sure that the 10 commandments were observed by the people so that our nation, the nation of Israel, could fulfill its role as Or L'Goyim, being a light to all the nations. Our ancestors were being prepared for the most important position that anyone could fill: messengers of the God of Israel, the one and only creator of the universe. God had just handed us his precious 10 commandments, and if all the nations would just follow them, peace and harmony would be restored to mankind. But while we were waiting for Moses to return from being in the presence of God for 40 days and 40 nights, we, that is our ancestors, failed that first test at Mount Sinai. The Levites were then chosen to take their place, and no one was to take that from them. This was not a privilege. It was a tremendous responsibility. For to whom much is given, much is required. Now, in the 3rd chapter of Numbers, Moses is told to record the names and numbers of the Levites, listing all their duties. Then he records every firstborn male of the Israelites, as well as their cattle. There were 273 more Israelite firstborn males than the Levites. So they were asked to give Aaron 5 shekels per head as the redemption price for each of the 273 Israelites. Today we have a Jewish ceremony called the Pidyon Haben. 30 days after the birth of the firstborn son, his father gives 5 silver coins to the Kohen to symbolically purchase his son's release from having the obligation of potentially serving as priest. They knew the tremendous responsibility. Moses had to count the people, but of course he couldn't have done it alone. It was a huge task. And even though he was in charge, it would take the whole community to get it done. It reminded me of when years ago I hosted a Zoom get-together for my mother's side of her family. Her grandparents on her mother's side arrived in Montreal after escaping the pogroms that happened in Kiev, Ukraine in 1906. They sailed to Canada with 9 children, and today we have grown into a huge family. Excuse me. It took me weeks to track down my family members, and we're nowhere close to the thousands in the original tribes. But sadly, today we have lost the notion that we belong to a tribe, and we have lost the importance of family and community. In my family, most of us don't know how many cousins we have, and others choose not to speak to some of them for reasons we may not even know or remember. And sadly, we are missing out on the joy and the importance of belonging to a tribe, to a community. I believe that when we throw at God, the consequences are greater than anyone can imagine. Now, back to the Mishkan and its sanctuary. They were specifically designed for our developmental stage, for the development of the people of Israel. To rebuild them now is like wanting to return to the years we were learning to walk. Being an adult has its challenges, which is why most prefer to remain a teenager. Those are the rebellious years in which discipline and training are the only things that will settle us down. That's the importance of building an army. You know, the men who go through army training are stronger, more organized, more disciplined, and work better as a team than anyone who doesn't. It's interesting that the Levites were the tribe chosen to protect and carry the Mishkan. Remember, they were the ones who killed the men of Shechem, whose prince raped and took Dinah, Jacob's daughter, hostage. The Levites were the men who stood with Moses after his descent from Mount Sinai, and they obeyed the order to kill 3,000 of our own people, their relatives, their friends, who had participated in the debauchery associated with the building of the golden calf. The Levites were not wimps or peacemakers. They had a warrior mentality, and they were chosen to be the bodyguards, marching in front of the army, carrying God's Ark of the Covenant. You know, all of us who have felt God's call in our lives are like the Levites. Each day holds its battles and its struggles. We all know that. But let's remember that we are marching with God and that the Ark of the Covenant is implanted in our hearts. Like our ancestors, we have been given the tools to fight. Let's not be afraid to use them. God gave us faith that by action, taking things and putting them into action, by listening, by obedience, we can turn these fears into trust. He gave us hope that helps us march from battle to battle, and life is filled with battles. He put us in a community, no matter how small or how far away we feel, so that we know that we are not alone. We're like that tiny piece in a large mosaic. And even when we feel unimportant, we need to know that we are not. The census shows us that we each have value. We each have our own innate gift and talent to help us fulfill our part, no matter how small. So we don't need to want to be like anyone else. Let's not be afraid to use these gifts and these talents. That's how we grow. That's how we learn to experience the joy of living a fulfilled life. Shabbat Shalom.